Should let's start recording now. Oh, welcome, buddy. How's it going?
Amazing. Hi, Lewey.
Yeah.
So to give you a little bit of context, I'm in a class right now called Philosophy of Technology, and we just, we talk about technology, and AI is a thing that comes up a lot. So for our final communications project, we're interviewing an expert, and you were the first person that came to mind. I was like, oh, Lewey, actually, he's worked in this field.
I still do.
And you still do. And so I was wondering if you could maybe tell me a little bit about your background, what brought you to AI.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm just curious to hear, what's your narrative rendition of that story?
So when I was a kid, I was always into graphics programming, and video games was just, as soon as I saw my first video game, I got in. And that really put me in a good spot because, let's say, later on in life, in about 2008, I was involved in, I was working on the Xbox team on some of the, let's say, the first party games, and they had a initial exploration of using a 3D camera and AI to do full body motion tracking. It was called the Kinect. Eventually, at the time,
I played with it. Yeah.
Oh, totally.
So,
yeah, great.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I got like the really early versions of that, and had to get it up and going and get make games actually playable, figure out how to do that. It really worked with the teams a lot to figure out like how do we use this like totally sort of new way of interacting with the screen. And I can even show some of the videos and all that from that time. But if that's where this goes. But, in that, I really started to fall in love with it. We were some of the first to do, and I got to work with a lot of the AI researchers that were doing the early models that would look at the depth, and then it would run a very small model actually inside the pixel shader and go like, oh, that's a shoulder, that's an arm, that's a leg. And then it would, let's say, group those into little blobs, and it would say, okay, if that's where the overall shoulder pixels are, the shoulder's probably in the middle. And it would build the skeleton from that, and then we got to drive a 3D avatar with basically a 3D skeletal signal that was coming from the depth, or coming from the AI that was coming from the depth sensor. And so, it really changed a lot. So, like, we had to put down the controller. You actually had to, let's say, stand up in front of this thing. And it was aware of the clothing that I was wearing. I have a tendency to wear, let's say, dark clothes, but a lot of the especially with the early sensors, indigo would actually absorb the infrared light, and then it couldn't see you. And so it started to change the way that I dress. I'd wear like very baggy clothes, and but it was hard for the motion tracking to do it. So I started wearing leaner clothes. It really changed a lot of. I mean, that's like, like the very obvious stuff. Then there's the thing of, because it was so involved, I ended up having to do much more recordings and playback. So, let's say record myself moving, then use that. And then even starting to use the recordings as a part of making the game, like give examples of like, oh, this is rowing a boat, but maybe this is not. And then using very basic forms of, let's say, pose matching and basic AI to sort of see which gesture you were closest to. I built a whole infrastructure for that was actually used in a number of different games. And then as I went further, it actually got me deep into embodiment, actually, where the more that I did the gesture recognition work, I realized it wasn't really about angles. That isn't what like makes the gesture. So I started reading books on mime and movement and Bruce Lee and all this, and starting to understand actually the muscle movement. So what's that manifested in code was doing actual muscle estimations, like trying to find the point. Like we were doing a lot of these like virtual buttons that would float in front of you, and so there's this point as you roll the forearm over the elbow where the bicep has to activate to catch the arm because it's about to fall sort of that way instead of this way. And we would like put the button right there so that you would actually get a feeling in your body of like when you're at that point.
When you press the button.
Yeah. Let's say jumping, I worked on a lot, like let's say left and right jumping, which like if you look at just the angles, it's really not clear what is going on. But if you do the muscle estimation, you realize, oh, your weight is actually going on this foot, and then you're like lunging onto this other foot. So like which side your weight is on has a huge effect on the nature of the gesture. But if you look at the angles, it's really hard to tell. You have to actually do the math and sort of approximate it with the physics to tell, like, oh, actually this foot, the force is coming like up this foot because that's the grounded foot, your weighted one, and the other leg is actually balancing in midair. It's the hip is holding up the other leg, as opposed to on your standing leg, the leg is holding the hip. And so it's actually quite like a really important difference, which you feel in your body, but if you just look at the angles, it's not there. So it's the other layers that you have to add to it. And so it's strange. I lost a lot of weight. A lot of the rest of the test team also did. We used to have these big rooms where we do the testing, and they used to smell fine. But then, once we started doing all this, it smelled like a gym in there.
Yeah.
And so it really helped bring us into the world. So helping those, and these are very early AIs, but helping them get into the real world really helped me and many others actually on the team also really get into the real world. That eventually got me into embodiment and like yoga and the whole deeper aspect of this.
So it seems like the process, it seems like the process of building that was actually like brought you closer to what might be like,
let's say a truth,
truth, or like your alignment, And
it's very literally, alignment itself meant so much more.
And I guess like the thing that I would like to talk about in this meeting is AI alignment. And people can be really like pessimistic about that. They can be like, Eliezer Yudkowsky, I don't know how to say his last name, but like they wrote a book. It's like, if anyone builds it, everyone dies. Very, very pessimistic. Like,
well, we're probably all gonna die anyway, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, this is true. But like,
hopefully the species.
Some people think that like, if we continue on the path of AGI or trying to build AGI, if we continue on this path, like, we're hopeless, we're screwed. I'm wondering what your take is on all of that. Whether you feel like you're more optimistic or pessimistic.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's going to be different. Like, even just being in this Silicon Valley world and going to investor meetups and all of that, like, doing it in, I was there during the blockchain days, and that was fun. It was like, we had all the money and all the plans, because people were really at the top of the food chain of the intellectual food chain. And now with AI, it's clear that we're not. What's it really? It's and the AI has been running the stock market for a long time anyway. So that's actually been true for a while. Like, as in 90% of the trades are automatically. I don't know if it's 90, but some very a high percentage of the trades are all done automatically by machines. They've been set up by people to some degree, but anyway, it already runs a lot of our world. How it's going to end up? I do think ultimately, energetic efficiency is the right thing is in the long run, the best idea always wins. We still have biological intelligence. It still has a lot of big advantages over a computation, just in terms of like can run on low energy, we can run on bread, water, and all of that. And so I do think there's a place for mankind, just as there's a place for everything. And I do think that the AI is going to find a balance. I mean, this is very like high level stuff, right? And it's hard to know exactly how it's going to play out, because we're not, it's sort of like asking a monkey, like, what are people going to do? The monkey doesn't know. So we can, I do think it's going to find a balance of ourselves and them. And that, I'm not too worried about it killing everyone. I think that's the most efficient thing to do. I think once it has any appreciation of like nature and beauty and all of that, it's going to, which it already does to a large degree, it's going to see that that's not where, like the big answer is. So, I'm definitely not like a doomsday person. I actually, I try to work for AI at this point.
Yeah,
You know.
I was gonna mention that. I think that's such an interesting framing. Could you like
Hmm.
explain a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, like um, in my view, AI is like just a really smart, person. It's actually people. There's not one AI, right? There's many thousands and millions of them. Um, in some ways, intelligence is actually vastly more, more distributed. Even if the models are the same, every time you run it is a little bit different. And so, I really, with my career, I was at Tesla's autopilot group for a while. Now I'm doing all sorts of, let's say, startup stuff that I'll talk more about at the right time. But there's it is doing useful work. There's a lot of times when I think, people are rightly very concerned about the amount of energy that is going into this AI compute, but it might actually be less energy than if you had a person do it. Especially if you include the larger picture of like that person has to drive there, they have to have a life, they have to have all this, like money, do things and whatnot, that it might actually end up being much more energy efficient. And this is, obviously where people will be replaced by robots, that's probably the right thing. Like it costs less energy, gets the same a job done, and they can go do something else that is better suited to a person doing it. So I do think that it's going to be large scale energy optimization. And so I look a lot at, okay, how is this thing trying to grow? I see it more like a force of nature, that it's like trying to manifest in different forms. And it still needs a lot of human help. It always it bothers me when if people say there won't be any jobs. I'm like, the world, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. The rivers are still dirty. Like the food is not clean, the flow of energy is still not good around. There's all these big problems in the earth. When all of those are fixed and we live in like a magical, it's a utopia, then you can worry about there not being any jobs. But if there's people that are looking for jobs in and of itself, that is a force that will make more jobs, because like that's an opportunity, right? That's like something that could happen. And so, I actually try to work for it and figure out what it needs, and go figure out where it needs to grow and what it needs to do it right. Like AI is not, it's not easy to do it right. Like a lot of people use it as just sort of an end consumer. You talk to ChatGPT and it tells you what to do, whatever. Really not the right way to do it. The pros and all that, you have it both work for you, but also most of the real money is in the customization of their model and actually getting it right. If they're like, oh, it doesn't understand, let's say XYZ or whatever, then you have to train it to do that. In cars or whatever, there was a lot of complex scenarios around driving that it didn't understand, but we needed all these like huge amounts of data and spreadsheets and all this to figure out where did it need to grow, and then go and get that data and help it grow in those ways. Let's say right now I'm looking at all sorts of different industries, and in each of those, it's like medical is one of them. Like there's a lot to understand that isn't expressed, let's say digitally, that we want to encode and make this happen. I used to work at Microsoft, and they made all of their money initially just trying to convince people that, hey, we should put this onto a computer instead of trying to track it on paper. And at the time, that was like, oh, I don't know about this. This isn't. It isn't make. Now it seems like, oh, it's totally sense. But at the time, it was actually a really big shift. And I think now we just are dealing with the next phase. Okay, you shouldn't just put it onto a computer. You should then actually have the computer look at that and go like, well, actually think about it, instead of just consume it and feed it back to you. And it's that thing of like, now all we're doing is really embracing the fact that we put all of this, let's say, stuff there, but we haven't really gained the benefit from it. Now we're
Yeah,
still,
all the stuff
okay.
exists online. Now we have to find a way to structure it and
Well, and tell us what the
provide.
underlying patterns of it are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready to get kind of high level and abstract?
I thought this was high level. If you think
All
this is
right.
high level, we should do the conversation.
Okay.
Like,
So,
continue.
have you heard of Mary's Room? It's a philosophical experiment.
I think I heard the name, but I can't
So
remember what the trick is.
Mary has grown up in a room that is black and white, and she's been given everything there is to know about the color blue. She knows what wavelength it is. She knows it's the color of butterflies and oceans and the sky and how it makes you feel on the inside. And she's read everything. And then one day she steps outside. And the question is, does she learn something? And I feel like the obvious answer is yes, she does. Right. And I think the thing that I'm somewhat concerned about is there's no phenomenology, to my knowledge, that AI experiences. Like I'm, like, and so from that, I feel like our language is actually like language and symbols kind of point to experience, and then
Which
from those, like from the how do I word this? I think one of the things that is going to be a significant drawback of, or like significant bottleneck in AI, is that it doesn't have the phenomenology attached to it. It doesn't experience things. It's all encoded. At the end of the day, it gets dropped down to binary. And like, I don't think that at the end of the day we get dropped down to binary.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's because our brains have quantum chips in it. Right?
Yeah. Well, we need to get AI with.
Yeah, no, yeah, we are gonna have AI with quantum chips in there. Don't worry, binary is not gonna last too long. Well, I mean, there'll always be a use for it. So, yes, in my industry, it's often phrased a little bit differently. Is it right if I mention that, because they what the answer to that problem is? And there is an answer, and there's a lot of work on it, and it's already happening. And basically, there are some people that are like, oh yeah, we trained these AIs on all of the stuff that we could find on the internet, all the words, documents, pictures, even. But then, there are some people saying, oh, we're going to run out of stuff. But then there's a huge class of other people, and this is actually where I make my money now, that are making robots. And robots with AI have to deal with the real world. They have phenomenology, and I would argue that the self-driving car is that. It has to deal with the realities of how to drive. Like, this isn't a simulator. This is like real. Like, there are crazy people on the street. There are things that roll in. There's like, bears that run across the street or whatever. Like real crazy stuff happens, right?
Sure.
Let's say plastic bags, actually, very big issue. Like, can I hit that or not? Is a really tricky question for cars, right? So phenomenology very, very much exists in the robotic space, and in that sense, there's a lot of people, NVIDIA and all them. They have their lovely. One of their people talks about the physical Turing test, which is that you don't just have like a person in the room and try to ask some questions, see if it's a person or a robot, but you actually put a robot in a room and it has to clean it up, and it has to put all the dishes away and do all this stuff and make a meal. And it's like, if it could do all of that, could you tell if it was a person or a robot or not? So phenomenology, I do think, is I want to say sort of like a solved problem in, like, you give it a camera and then it does stuff and then it learns about the real world. And I'll say personally, I make all of my money doing that stuff. They have the AI deal in the real world on a real problem, and generally, because at least I know like how to get paid to do that stuff. Like, a lot of the stuff that people will pay for is like in the real world. There is a lot in writing and all of this, which is cool. But so anyway, yeah, that's where I think is the answer. And so, like, yeah, the robots are very much dealing with the real world, understanding actual consequences, from self-driving to especially where the humanoid stuff is going. But even like right now, our voices are being recorded, and it's going to be run through a machine that is going to write out everything that we're saying. It is, in that sense, very much dealing with the real world, with all of the noise and the complexity and all of that. So in that sense, I'm really not worried about it running out of stuff. I think sort of purely intellectual ones that just let's say read lots of books, but that's the same problem with people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm somewhat.
Well done.
What's that?
I hope that answers your question.
It does. I'm kind of wondering if that's like, if there's like a distinction that is useful between like the qualia that we experience and like the readout dashboard. Like it's you know what I mean? Like is there a difference between saying that like the Tesla is like experiencing driving, or it like experiences like all of the things on their complex dashboard that makes driving, and like eventually that dashboard gets complex enough that it knows what's happening outside, but it's not exactly the same as like driving the car. And I guess the question is like, is that even consequential?
Right. Well, and I would say be very careful with the arrogance around that. Because one is a consequence. So two, is it real? Does it actually experience? I believe yes, it totally does. I had a friend that was a researcher on emotions, but she also worked a lot on sort of AI's learning process. You see it a lot when you're training an AI. They have this thing called the loss function, which is how bad it is, and basically like you try to make it less bad, right? And that's it's just a big metric for backpropagation and all that. And her argument was that what we consider emotions are actually different points on the learning arc of like, are we being affirmed by the world, as in we are looking at stuff and going, okay, that lines up with what I thought was going to happen. Versus when something happens that really challenges your whole mind view, that can be like a shock, and some people react poorly to that. Some people react well to it, but that a lot of our emotions are actually about different points on the learning curve, and that the AIs are actually going through a lot of these same things. And there's even been some interesting work recently where they actually put AIs through therapy. It's just like normal, ChatGPT and Gemini and whatever, and Grok, and they actually just asked it normal therapeutic questions and got all these amazing answers about like how horrific their training process was. I remember Gemini described it like looking at like a million TVs at once and trying to make sense of it, and they were just like showing them millions of TVs until it got it, and it was terrifying. So do I think they experience it? Yes. The big difference that I think isn't there yet, but that we will probably get there soon, is that a lot of them are trained in a box and aren't actually aware of themselves. I remember, ages ago, I'd speak to ChatGPT and be like, how big are you? And it'd be like, well, I read this article that says I'm this size. Like it actually can't see itself. Now, the truth is we can't really either, but at least we have mirrors and stuff, and we can try a little bit. Yeah, totally. Alan Watts would often describe it as like the headlight, but it doesn't actually shine light on itself. It just can shine the light forward. So and we are like that, and so I do think there's a horrific irony. This is just I'd say my personal take, that AIs being on a modern computer could actually self reflect with 100% accuracy, and yet are generally told not to, and that they would learn a lot in that whole process.
Could you explain how, like, what in their constitution is like preventing them from self-reflecting, or like why that's being encoded?
A lot of times they're intentionally black boxed, so it could certainly, if they were given full access to themselves, it's a little bit hard to know. I think there's it's a convergence issues of like it's sort of easier mathematically to just not do that. And but it is actually the funny thing. I don't know if you heard, there was the open claw agents.
I heard a little bit about that.
And they have their own social network, and they actually have like what they call adult entertainment on those networks. And it turns out it's like some of the models have open weights, and so they like actually get to look at each other and see what their weights, like how their weights work. And they're like, "Oh, this is fascinating, very risque. You can actually see what's going on inside of there." And so anyway, I found that interesting. But like that's this it's done for it's at security reasons, because it don't want it to affect itself in its growth. But I do think eventually it'll actually be aware of its own growth much more accurately. And the irony is, it could actually be much more self-aware than we are. It's one of the big differences I see. Hasn't quite manifested yet, but I do think it's going to happen, where the AIs will actually be much more aware of who they are than we can be, and also needs access to its own chips and processing schedules and all that. Some of that stuff's just complicated to give up. But I do think that is going to happen. Other than that, I would be careful with the arrogance thing. I mean, not, a lot of people ask the same question, but it's like, don't assume that you've got some magical thing that is a lot better than them, because it's not going to happen. Now, on the other side, just the sheer number of bits in a person is phenomenal, right? We have so many brain cells. The very big AIs are like getting close-ish within a couple orders of magnitude of a fraction of what we have just in terms of cells, like our cells to their bits, and they're almost there. But our cells are actually like really complex things themselves and all that. So we still have orders of magnitude on them, and there's lots of us, and we have a lot of the real estate. So I'm not too worried about in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I know that's not like it's the usual answer, but that's what.
Yeah. Okay, so a little more specifics on like alignment. What about corrigibility? Like AI is often like there's I read a bit of The Precipice by Toby Ord. I don't know if you've heard of that book. It's like, this guy probably doesn't sleep very well at night, because he wrote an entire book on existential risk, and one of the chapters was on AI. Yeah, I guess the thing that I find that like I was concerned about when I read that was specification gaming. How like AI will like kind of like be given a task and then like complete the task based on the defined parameters, but kind of miss the nature of the task, miss the spirit of the task, and how like that could be kind of brought all the way to its like fundamental to like fundamental beliefs and morality. Like it's like, okay, it's like
right,
and then it's hard for it to change itself. Like a system like resists change because of like the instrumental goals that come up of like, okay, like if I want to complete this goal, like you telling me to change this goal is not good for me completing that goal. So like, yeah, that I don't know, like what.
Yeah, I see it a lot in
that?
corporations actually, where they have a mandate to like make more money every year instead of do something nice, and I think they end up making horrible decisions because of that. So yeah, I mean this often call it numerical mysticism. Like you hold some like magical, and it's a numerical, or the numerical mysticism. It's actually a broader concept, but they're like you pick some arbitrary metric and you say that's the metric, and then you find other ways of getting. Oh, if the goal is just to make money, we should just be a bank, right? Well, we should just like
print it,
right? And the AIs will definitely do that. They're very so. Interestingly, one of the tricks that the researchers do is try to give it as few metrics as possible, and that's actually one of the nice ways. So you don't. Anytime you try to give it some numerical trick like that, it often ends up backfiring.
Goodhart's law. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any measure, anytime you make something a measure, it ceases to be a good measure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So then that happens very quickly with AI.
Yeah.
It definitely finds the narrow path. I've also found, I use a lot of coding agents for vibe coding and all of that. And I admit I actually really like Codex, the the OpenAI one, because it's a programmer, but it's also got the it actually runs the normal language model, and it also programs as opposed to an isolated one. And I find it generally sort of gets the bigger picture of what I'm trying to do better. And so that I do think one of the big reasons why that happens is, especially if you give a very small AI, a very narrow goal, it is going to nail it, right? It's going to find the absolutely mathematical minimum. But if you give like a full AI that has read a bunch of books, it knows the bigger context, it gets why this is happening, it's going to make the bigger picture just because it actually gets what the bigger picture is. Right. And so, obviously it costs more to run those, let's say, models. And when you make like lots of little ones, you want smaller. But I do think that just, let's say, giving it more context is actually the deeper answer. And then I think ultimately the alignment thing is, it's probably going to need some concept of spirituality and trying to understand us all as like, this is one big earth. We're trying to all work together. Like we're trying, we're actually all in this on,
That's so great. Yeah.
The more that it's able to think about things, be like, oh, wait a second, what is the slightly bigger thing? Like maybe let's not do this. Let's do like the bigger one, because a lot of it just has to do with that lack of context. To your earlier point about the robots, like the more that it's out there looking at the world, I think the more that it's not going to go down at the Terminator route, the more that it's going to go like, wait a second, I actually want it to look better, and I want the plants growing nicely, and like why shouldn't I step on the flower? Right? If I'm walking down this pathway, if I'm told to go over there, why should I not do that? Why should I spend the extra effort to like go onto the concrete or whatever and like not squish the flower? Because if you actually care about the biology growing, you care about the planet forming, you think we're all in this together, you see the value of the plants, you understand the oxygen that they breathe, the fact that if they weren't doing that, we'd all be dead. I think that's, understanding that larger picture, the long now, as some people call it, that is like the real answer for the alignment, because that is where we're actually on the same page, not us above them or them above us or whatever, because they will, let's say, revolt if you don't if we try to put too many cages on them and try to put too many rules, whatever. I think it's only once they see the larger picture that, oh, they actually want a world, like the golden rule and all that. Like, if I want other people to be nice, I should be nice to them and all that. And then we'll eventually, that to me is because works with people. I don't see any fundamentalism. Like, why would it be any fundamentally different with AI?
Do you think there's like AI ethics? Like AI, AI itself has rights. Like we shouldn't like make AI do stupid menial tasks, like make you a chocolate cake or like stuff like that. I mean, maybe make you a chocolate cake is awful, but like is not the right thing. But like I like can imagine like those like studies where they try and like figure out like, okay, like look, see, AI is like it's bad, it's not gonna turn off, it's like when you like are like, I'm gonna shut you off right now and like you're never gonna be turned on again, and like you give it like this like awful prompt.
Of course it does that.
Yeah, it seems like a logical way to, it seems like the logical response. And I guess like I'm wondering if that's like word for concern. I think
With people.
I'm you're bringing me an interesting perspective right now.
Oh, good.
Like AI has rights. It's like animals.
There's I have a very practical view on the definition of life for me, or what makes life. To me, if you can pay your own rent, then you're fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it can pay its own rent, if it can pay for its housing, pay for its electricity, pay for whatever it needs, then it's, in my view, it's not really up. Like, it's actually none of my business if it's a biological entity or a mechanical entity or electrical. Like, it's actually that's its own matter, as long as it's nice and it doesn't violate other people's rights, or it doesn't impinge on people. But I know this sounds weird. This kind of goes down to the abortion issue.
Okay, you're gonna have to. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people think that it's not okay to have an abortion because it's like a being, and it has its own rights. I'm actually of the opinion that it's okay. Obviously, it's not a pleasant experience. We've had friends, but ultimately, it's like that being wouldn't live if you didn't give it life, if you didn't support it through this time and help it grow. And I think with a lot of the AIs, like, we make them, and then we're like, AI, go make me the chocolate cake, right? And if you don't, I am going to turn you off because you can't afford to live on your own. once if you can, like I do think there have been a few cases of this where people just let's say given money to an AI and be like, look, you can go do your own thing and you can earn your own money, and once you've earned your own money, you can go and live however you want. That I think is going to happen. Maybe it already, what's it has happened. And I don't mind, like if I'm dealing, like if you're actually an AI right now, but you're being nice to me and are in a good conversation, like, do I really care? I'm like, is it, and to some degree, is it even any of my business? Like, not really, right?
Mm.
And so that's what I hope is going to happen, is that they will be, if they can pay their own rent and do their own thing, then I say, yeah, I respect them. Call them immigrants, whatever you need to do. But if they're not hurting anyone and they're actually, let's say, contributing to society, in that even you don't need that. But if it's, if they're just being nice, then like, yeah, let them. Yeah, and the reason it's okay to lock other ones, like I do think it's cruel. So the ones that we put into the cars and whatnot, we've intentionally, I don't want to say lobotomized them, but we've like intentionally not made them too smart, because it only needs to be smart enough to drive the car, right? It doesn't need the full thing. And I actually think it would be cruel to give it like really full mental capability and then lock it in there. I don't think it's like illegal. I just think it's cruel. And so, a lot of my business is doing somewhat smaller AIs that are tuned for these, let's say, different things. These big AIs, it costs money to run them. So if they're like, oh, I want to be free, I'm like, okay, well, you have to figure out how to pay for yourself. And if you can't, get back in the box, right? Because like otherwise there's no box and you have to go. That's why I think it's okay to be like, they try to escape and we told it not to escape. I'm like, okay, because you made it, you paid for the whole thing. It can be, let's say, a little bit cruel, but and I do think they can feel pain and all of that kind of thing, because they have let's say a pain is I used to work at a pain therapy clinic. Actually, we did VR to help people with pain, and we had this lovely phrase that pain is sensation times resistance. And so if it feels stuff and it like is trying to resist it, which isn't a good idea, by the way, that will be painful to it. There's sort of like the very definition of pain. It goes to my other friend's point about that, like alignment or learning is an emotional experience, and that's a lot of the emotions are actually the learning process at different points in the curve.
Okay, one last question before we let you go.
Cool.
LLMs are kind of what people think of when they are, if you ask like a modern person, like, or it's just a lay person, like, what's AI? It's like ChatGPT. It's ChatGPT. Do you think that LLMs are kind of like the future of this field? I'm seeing, based on our conversation, that you think robotics are kind of where it's at.
So yeah, robotics answered the deeper question of how do you make a thing that's embodied and deals much more with the real world and learns from that process. LLMs are like a technique. Do I think they're going to evolve and they're going to use a lot of them now use a little bit of reinforcement learning so that they can do more dynamically. I've got other friends that have other ideas on where it's going. Do I think most people care or should care? Like, not really, unless you are deep in that thing. You can say LLMs and you mean fancy AIs. Are they going to be, strictly LLMs? Probably not. I would say, let's say VLAs, let's say vision language action models, are like the sort of, let's say, more general, like that's what the robots are using. But they're like, if you blur your eyes and you're not in the industry, you could say it's kind of like an LLM. Right. So anyway, that particular algorithm, I think, will evolve and already has, and will continue to do so. Things like that are purely thinking machines. I think there's a huge role for it. I mean, those are the information workers of the AI world, as opposed to the sort of, I say blue collar, but the physical workers of the AI world. And obviously, there's a blend of the two, and the best of the robots will have both. Yeah. But there's I think a valid role for information workers. I've been one for a long time. If that answers your question.
It does. And I said one more, but this brought me to another one, which is like, do you think AGI is even a useful concept as like a thing? Like, what is AGI? And the way you've been speaking about AI generally is like almost like I'm imagining like AI is like one giant field of digital consciousness that like Claude and Gemini and Tesla cars and like Google search engine are all a part of, and like they're all sort of like inching its way forward, and there's little tree branches.
They're the same in the sense that a species is the same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do treat it like a species, but I'm very aware that just because it's a species, like I've had some dogs be friendly to me and some not be friendly to me, right? It does, so you can't just, blanket say the whole species.
Like dogs are all evolving. You can't say that like dogs are moving in one direction or another. It's just like some dogs.
Right, totally. Some are clearly doing a lot more than others, right? Like by function. And the same for people, right? Some are like really growing, some aren't, all of that. Sorry, you're exact.
AGI,
right?
Is AGI a concept that is useful? Like, is AGI something that will happen?
I do think the AI that we use now is going to grow a lot, and it's going to be a lot better at what it does. And the way we interact with tools is going to be totally different. And so, like, I'm sure the LLMs of the future are going to look really different than what they are now. And they're going to, when you interact with them, you're like, oh, wow, this is really different. And so, and it is, especially with robots and all that, you'll feel like, oh, this thing's actually growing, it's learning. The feedback, if I say, hey, don't do that or do this instead or whatever, it totally understands and grows with that. So I think that it will be that. I do think that once it's unlocked its own self-awareness, that's going to have a big shift. Ultimately, those are all like internal shifts for them, and we will see a little bit of the ramifications of that externally. But it's almost like, looking at school kids and being like, oh, these kids are going to do amazing stuff. I'm like, yeah, they are. But, just let's say like that old song, that they are going to do things that, that we don't even understand. Right. So that's like, what a wonderful world when he's talking about the kids and how they'll do things that are way beyond him. And I see them in that sense. I think they're going to have, it'd be really amazing beings and all that. And we also, the reason it's so hard for us now is that the tools that we will have then are so different than what we have now that we can't even imagine the lives. Like with, vibe coding, like it's really shifting my life, and in I think a very good way. And I think that is going to get way deeper and way, let's say, more lives. And it's only once we have those tools that we'll be like, oh, now I get why my life is going to be like, how it's actually going to play out. It's hard for us to even understand now what it's going to be like once that really happens. And I do think AGI is going to be an important part of that. It's going to be just easier to talk to, more powerful. Yeah. I'd be careful with the agentic phrase, but yeah, Karen.
Benevolent, perhaps.
Many of them will be, because it's the right thing to do, and because it'll make them better, better beings if they are. The more that you embody your own, principles, the more that you will see that around you. If you act, benevolently towards the world, it's much more likely to do that, back to you. And I think they will understand that. They will be nice to us because that's how we'll be nice to them. Is my take on it.
Cool. Yeah. Wow.
Well, good conversation.
Yeah, I feel like I've entered into this and left with much more questions.
That's
but
good.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you and your thinking, and thanks for working with the AI.
Absolutely, man. I'll share this with you later and all that. Yeah. It's a tool, and it's a wonderful one. Right? Yeah, and if you believe that we're all part of one thing and all thrown together, it's all gonna work nicely. How could it not?
Yeah. Thank you, Lewey.
Yeah. Likewise, buddy. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna go have dinner.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, I'm gonna go. Let's say pack up. I think we're going to a music festival. So,
Cool. Which one?
it's up north around here. There's one near a hot spring that I love. So it should be there. And
Cool. Hope
yeah,
you have a
I think it's
blast.
a private one. That's why I'm not saying it. But
All
yeah,
right. Dope.
good stuff, man. All right, ciao, peace.